Hi guys, so thank you for watching this tutorial video on doing a resin artwork. So you might have purchased one of the starter kits from me, or you might have your own starter kit, or just need a little bit of a refresher or guidance on what we need to, steps we need to follow when we're doing our resin artwork. So I'm popping my gloves on. So I know that sometimes you can probably get away with doing some resin work without gloves. If anything, it just makes it a bit sticky and difficult to get off your hands. And also as well, you need to be aware of, in some cases, depending on the type of resin, there is a risk of a allergic reaction, which is something we obviously don't want to happen. So I'm using, and if you've come to one of my workshops, you'll be familiar with this. This is 6mm MDF, and I've cut the edges, so the edges are bevel cut with a bench saw, and then I've sprayed these with a matte black paint. And they're just, the spraying is to act as a sealant, and also as well gives you can have it as a background colour. You can obviously paint different colours if you want to. I've generally done with black. I quite like the black effect with some of the resin artwork. And this tape on the back is a barrier tape that I've got from a company online called Easy Composites, and that just means that when the resin drips, and you'll have lots of drips underneath it, you can peel the tape off, and you get the drips will go, and you'll be left with a relatively clean finish underneath. There might be a bit of resin that's on the board, but it's a much tidier finish. You can use different types of tape. The good thing about this barrier tape is that it's a bit thicker, and when you're peeling it off, it doesn't tear like a sellotape might tear. You don't want to use masking tape because that's more of a fabric based tape, and if you use masking tape, you'll find that you either won't be able to peel it off, or it'll peel off and tear, and you'll be left with, because the resin soaks into the masking tape. So if you didn't have any of this barrier tape, use sellotape. You might just spend a little bit of time getting it off, so it's not a big deal. I'm using this silicone mould. So this is a baking mould, and I'm actually trying this for the first time. It was my girlfriend's, and I found it in this room, and I thought, oh, that would be perfect because it's got the edges on there, so when the drips come down, well, let's assuming it fits. Yes, it just fits. The wastage will be contained within this space. I'm going to pop so I've got plastic shot glasses. So with these plastics, you will be able to recycle these. So if you've got any resin that's left in them, let it dry, and then you can peel it out. They might not be as pristine as when you first get them, but they'll definitely be reusable. And this is just a suggestion of a way to hold the resin board up from the ground or from the surface. So I'm going to pop these on, and then I'll pop that on there. So yeah, it is quite a tight fit, but I think that the resin will drip down where it's supposed to. So I've also got the pigments that I'm going to use are the ones that I provide with the starter kit. So we've got a red, yellow, green, and I've got a large tub of, not that I'll be using very much of this at all, the gold mica powder, so giving that shimmery type effect. So I'll be using these 4 different types of pigment, and it might be that you've got some other pigments, you're watching this and you've got some other pigments that you want to use of your own. I've got a spreader, so when I pour my clear resin on there in a moment, I can use the spreader to spread the resin, but you could use your fingers if you want to. If you use your fingers, then you'll probably have to change the gloves, which you might have to change the gloves anyway. So also I've got scales here, so I'll use these to measure the right amount of resin, although you can do it by volume as well. So you could have, where are they? I'm going to grab, well, I've got one of these measuring cylinders, and when you're filling it up, you could see how far you filled it. So for example, with this resin that I'll be using, and a lot of resins are a ratio of 1 to 50, or 100 to 50, 100 parts to 50 parts, or sometimes they are 1 to 1. So if you weren't using the scales and you were pouring into here, so just a simple way of translating that, so you can see on the side here, I believe this is, I think you can see millilitres. So where my finger is there is 100. So to get the right ratio, you'd fill 100 resin and then you want another 50 of hardener. So you've got a total volume of 150. In terms of weighing them, there's a slightly different ratio for weighing, but there is a tolerance. So, you know, sometimes I'll pour my resin in and think, oh, I've put a few too many grams of hardener in. It's fine. It generally doesn't have an effect, but obviously you want to try and get to the desired, correct amount. So on the glass cast here, it will say resin and hardener. So by volume, 100 parts resin, 50 parts hardener. So that's if you were measuring millilitres. And then where we're weighing it, it's 100 parts resin and 45 parts hardener. So there's a slight difference, but in generally it's 1 to 2 or 2 to 1 ratio. So I will weigh my resin out. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I need to tell you. No, I'll weigh the resin out and we'll crack on and start doing our picture. Other things you could put underneath this instead of this silicone board is things like baking sheets are really good that you can put down, and the resin will drip onto it and it'll dry and it'll just peel off. And there's also a variety of cheap table coverings that you can get from shops like Poundland that allow you to, if you wanted to peel the resin off, but at least it's a cheap table covering that you can use in case you get any spillage. The resin is quite thick, so it's not like if you dripped water that it would run quickly. So there's not a huge amount of mess, and you'll see anyway. So I'm going to mix. I want approximately 200 grams of resin to cover this board. So I'm getting my iPhone out, I'll go to my calculator. So if I did 120 grams of the resin, and then I'm going to times that by 1.45, so that'll give me the total amount. So that's 174, so I need a bit more than that. So let's say 135 grams of resin times by 1.45, so that's 195. So that's pretty close to the top. So if you were watching me doing this calculation, think, what is he talking about? So if you've got a 25 by 25 centimetre board, you want to have 135 grams of resin, and then you want 60 grams of hardener. So you get a total volume of 195. So if you're watching this, you can press pause and write down 135 grams of resin and 60 grams of hardener. Right. So I'm going to pour in 135 grams of resin. So I'm pouring quite slowly because the numbers soon tot up, and before you know it, if you're not careful, you'll have more than what you want. There we go, 135. I don't usually get it spot on, so if I'm a few grams either way, it's fine. I haven't noticed too much of an issue with being slightly out, but as I was saying, you want to see that's already gone up to 136, but I'm not going to worry about that. And then I'm going to bring this up to the total amount of 195. And you can see it's gone a couple of grams over, but again, I'm not going to worry about it too much. So I'm getting my iPhone again because I want to make sure I mix this for at least 3 minutes. So I'm not going to bore you with watching me mix. So I'll either fast forward this bit or we'll cut to the next part. Or before I fast forward it, so with the mixing, it might sound obvious, but you want to mix for a while in one direction, then maybe go back in the other, maybe sort of a figure of 8, and also making sure, if you can, you get whatever you're using to mix. So in this case I'm getting lollipop sips right down into that corner, that bottom corner. So we're doing lots of random mixing, but we're making sure we're doing it for at least 3 minutes. Okay, so I've mixed my resin. You'll also see that I've chickened out a little bit and put some baking paper down, because I'm not. When I look down, I know that there appears, when you're looking at that, there's a gap there, but it is close to the edge. But in case there's anything drips over the edge, it will just go onto the baking paper, so that'll be fine. So I'm going to take my shot glasses first. So I've got my resin mixed. I'm going to have 4 shot glasses. I'm going to open up the pigments that I'm going to use, pop them to the side. So I'm going to pour some of this resin into these shot glasses. So when we're using, say on this size board, 25 by 20 centimeters, 25 by 25 centimeters, this is a normal size shot glass, but we're probably only going to fill about 1/3 of that and then mix the colour in. And it might be that we don't even use all of that resin up. So I'm just going to pour roughly 1/3 of that cup, or maybe even less. So I know I'm not going to need it. And sometimes there's a bit of a tendency for this type of picture that I'm going to do to feel that you need to use all of your pigments up. Or that when you finish the picture, I've dripped a bit on the board, but that's fine because it's going to be going on there anyway. When you finished your picture, you'll feel that I need to use the resin for another project. If you're organised enough to maybe have something on standby, then great, but don't. I've found that I've had to let go of that because I'll end up just making an inanimate object from resin that doesn't really have much help. So I've mixed these up, and then I'm going to pour this on the board. There's quite a lot of air bubbles in this. They will generally go by themselves, and I've also got a Dremel torch here which I can just go over the resin with, just to take some of those air bubbles out. But you can usually, once you're starting to do your picture, you can usually see whether you need to do that or not. You don't always need to do that. So I'm just going to let that sit for a moment and go back to mixing up the colours. One of the things, so I'm on quite a flat surface, although it looks a flat surface, and even I bet you if I put a spirit level on here it would say it's totally flat. When we're doing our picture, the resin will eventually, and will help it go over the edges, that it can pull your picture in one direction or another, and to a certain degree that creates an effect of its own, and that's fine, but we want to make sure that it's not, as we're doing the picture, that it's not always going to one side. So as I start doing the picture, I'll make reference to that, because it might be that you're noticing actually I'm getting more of a puddle on one side than the other, and then if that happens, you can take, I've snapped these in half, bit of the lollipop stick, you can lift the picture up and pop these between the picture and the shot glasses that are underneath, just to redress it. And it might be that when you're finished the picture, you have to take those out again. Right. So to mix my colours, I've only got a very small amount of that. I've just dipped it in, really small amount. The pigments for pictures will go an awful long way. You can buy a pigment and it will last you a long time. So that's that one. I'll then do the mica next. So again, I've got a little shovelful there. I've probably got more than what I need on that one. Good mix. You'll probably remix these again when you go to use them. Part of the reason why I'm allowing that just to sit there before it goes over the edge, because it will, as soon as they're mixed together, so I've got the green here, they'll start hardening, and that's quite helpful to avoid a lot of the resin going off the side of the picture. But if you forgot about doing that and you poured all of your resin on and it was dripping off the side, it's not going to be a huge deal. Some resins mix easier than others, but generally you're going to be stirring until you're happy with the consistency. So you can see it's starting to drip off there. It's fine. It's close, similar distance to all the way round. I'm going to pour a bit more resin on. Round boards would probably be helpful, but they're just a little bit more difficult to manufacture yourself. You can buy them probably, but it's always good to try and keep the costs down if we can. So I'm just gently pulling the resin, so I'm not taking it all the way down to the board and then pulling it over. I'm just dragging the surface, taking it towards the edge of the board before I then encourage it over the edge. So yeah, that's fine. It's starting to go over there, so we'll go with that. With this MDF board, it's a bit of a, the cut through section or the angle section can be a little bit rough. So I do sand them, but it's sometimes a bit difficult to get a nice smooth finish. So sometimes you just need to run your fingers around the edge just to help get a good covering everywhere. And as soon as the resin starts to come over the edge, it'll always start moving in that direction. It's not that you'll lose all of the resin off the top of the picture because of the surface tension, but it will just be dripping over. So once you're comfortable that there's a bit of resin everywhere, if you were to leave a bit like that corner, there's a chance that the resin wouldn't go there, even though it's all around it. So you generally, where you want resin to be, you have to make sure there's some resin there to start off with. A lot of my air bubbles appear to be gone, but I am going to go over with the torch. So you might have come to one of my workshops and noticed that I didn't use the torch, or maybe used it once, and that really depends on, so I'm doing this on a cooler day, so it's less than 20 degrees, so the resin will be a little bit thicker. So I'm just I can see air bubbles in here, so I'm just going to go over it. And you can see the kind of action that I'm using, so it's not like I'm holding in one spot for any period of time. I haven't had resin burn on me before. Occasionally I might have left it and there's a little bit of smoke, but it will soon disappear. You can also use, you don't necessarily have to have naked flame, but that seems to be the way of getting rid of the bubbles the quickest. You can use like a craft heated torch. So I'm just going to I'm putting the lids back on these. I know, the resin is slowly starting to cure, but we've still got time, so it's helpful to be tidy as you go. I'm going to use a normal hairdryer to create an effect with the resin. So if you came to one of my workshops, you might have used a hairdryer, or you may well have used like the craft hot air blower. I'm using a hairdryer so that if you didn't want to buy a craft one, then you would be comfortable using a hairdryer. The general rule of thumb with a hairdryer is that they're often a lot more forceful, so you have to be a bit more measured about how. I often it's kind of a flick effect, and you'll see me do it. So as with these types of pictures, I'm not going to think too much about what I'm doing. So I'm going to pour some red. It'll come out across the picture. So I hardly used anything there. I'm probably going to add more, but you really don't need too much. And then I'm going to pour some of this yellow near it. Not for any particular reason. So I'm just looking at the underneath of the picture, so I can see drips are coming off. It looks relatively even all the way around, so that's good. So you don't necessarily have to use a hairdryer. It might look quite effective to just leave your picture like that, but we'll show you anyway. So when using especially the hairdryer, you want to be mindful about what's around, because it'll be quite a blast of air and could knock things over. So I'm moving my the pigments, mixed pigments, just a little bit further away, so that there isn't a risk of me blowing one of those over. So I've got the hairdryer here. I'm gonna hold it away and turn it on. And then I'm gonna So I love that. I think it looks really effective when you're just with a hairdryer. So what's things to bear in mind? I'm just going to give that a quick blast with the torch. I don't know if you can see it, but looks like there's some air bubbles just here. Yeah, and they go quite easily. Sometimes when you use the torch on the picture, the pigment will respond to that. So it might do something. It might move slightly, or you might get a cell effect. So when we've put those two colours down, we've used the hairdryer. And then if we put more colours down and we use the hairdryer again, we're of course going to be blowing these inks a little bit more. So it's just something to bear in mind, because you could end up with, you've put this colour down, but by the time you finish the picture, the original colours that you've put down are kind of spread all over the place. And again, that might be exactly what you were after. So it's a bit of green next. Although I'm kind of like the look of that, I kind of feel as though I should just leave it totally. But that's not all about me, it's about showing you guys. And then I'm going to put some gold with that. And again, there's no real reason why putting colours with the other than, you know, it does create an effect. But I guess I'm just saying it so I don't feel like you have to follow exactly what I'm doing. And again, I'm going to get the hairdryer out. So you can probably tell from this, and with how powerful the hairdryers are, they will push the ink quite a lot. If you're using like a little the craft ones, which I'll show you what they look like in case you are interested. If you're not familiar, this type of torch, it's a less of a blow, if you like, it's less force. I quite like using a hairdryer. I think they create something quite dramatic quite quickly. But if you feel as though you want a bit more control and you want to take a little bit more time with manipulating your picture, then you might want to choose that. Right, so I'm going to go back to this mica colour. Trying to do a little bit less than what I poured with that last piece. And I'm going to put a little bit red with that. So you can see I'm really not using much of this. There's plenty of, I could get away with probably using less pigment or less resin overall. But last thing you want is to not have enough resin. So again, hairdryer. I'll try that lower setting, see how. So you can see it's moving it. It's a bit more difficult to move it. So I suppose the only thing I would say when you're picking your colours for your picture, where you can, trying to make them quite contrasty. So there's quite a difference, and they might, if you were thinking about doing what colours you want for a room, they're kind of all generally of a palette and in sync with each other. But to get a nice or a bit more of a dramatic effect, I was encouraged to use some colours that are a little bit different. So I feel like with this, with the red and the gold, I want a bit of something a bit different in there. And just to be, why not, we'll put a bit of yellow in with that. And again, I'm hardly using any resin at all. Like I said, one of my observations of people at first doing that is they end up using quite a lot of their pigment, which can then, you know, overtake the picture. I like the black. I feel as it creates depth to the picture. Right, so another blast. I'm just looking, I'm wondering, will I do anything else? No, I think I'll leave it there. So what happens next is that I'm going to finish my picture, and I would say that's one of the things, is knowing when to step away. The picture itself will change during the drying process, and it will change mostly within the first couple of hours. So what you can't see from your vantage point is that there's lots of resin that's dripping down underneath. And what that means, as I was referring to earlier, as it drips off the board, I really like the effect of the resin around the corner or the edge of the picture. It will move the picture, or it will drag the picture towards the edge to varying degrees, and that's why there's maybe some scope to consider mixing your initial clear resin, pouring it on and moving it around, covering the whole board, and then remixing up some more resin to do your colours, so that the base has had a bit of time to set, but it's still in a position where you're going to be able to manipulate it. So I'm looking down, I'm looking around the edge. It looks to me that this is relatively level, i.e. the amount that's stripped off the side is relatively even all the way around the edge. So I'm not going to do anything else in terms of maybe lifting it up on one side than the other. So also what I'm not going to do now, which you might want to do at home, is to put something over this, like an upturned plastic container, to minimise the dust sticking to it. It's very difficult to avoid dust totally, but there are certain things, like putting a container over it now whilst it's wet, to avoid any dust getting stuck on it. This will be pretty much touch dry in 24 hours. Generally, I would suggest leaving it 48 to 72 hours. Just to make sure it's fully cured. The tape on the back that you saw earlier, the green tape, I would suggest taking off after 24 hours. And that just means that the resin is set, but it's still a little bit pliable in case, or if you left it longer, it might be difficult to get the resin off and get a cleaner finish on the resin. So yeah, we're going to leave that there now. I will then finish this video off by showing you the finished product and peeling the tape off the back. But I'm liking the look of that. I love the smoky effect. Pretty much the bit that I like the most is what I started with here. So I think I'm feeling a bit inspired to do another, and having most of the picture as the black, but with a nice sort of smoky effect coming through with maybe only 2 colours. Generally, I'll end up mixing 4 or 5 colours for a picture, and sometimes more, but maybe less is more. Anyway, thank you for watching. So you'll hold on a few seconds and you'll see the finished product. Okay, so this is a couple of days later. It's all nice and hard, and you can see the picture has shifted a bit. There's down on the silicone tray, you can see where some of the colours and the resins have come off, but that's kind of normal. I really like and I don't know how well you can see it because it's very reflective. Just the faint reds and yellows. I love the smoky effect that it creates. And you can, again, I don't know if you can see, but there's almost like a line, a streak effect here, and that'll be where the resin has moved off the side of the picture. So yeah, there we go. So I'll turn it over. You can see we've got the drips, and all we do from here is, if you put your nail under, you have to be careful when you pull these off, because they tend to have little resin drops fly everywhere, as you'll probably hear in a moment. There you go. It just helps leave you with a bit of more of a tidier finish. I've come back to this after 2 days, but you can take these off after 24 hours. And there you have it. So it just makes the back of the board a little bit tidier. It's always interesting with the stuff that's left over, and this being on a silicone will come out as well. So I have lots of leftover bits, and you could see there's all sorts of things you could do with this. Not with this piece, but the idea of clear resin. It's almost like I can't think of what they're called now. What you put up against the window, and then the light comes through. There's me being silly and forgetful. So yeah, this is quite interesting with what's left over. Stained glass, that's it. But yeah, I often put all these to one side with an idea of doing something fancy like chopping them up into different shapes and making a mosaic, but that hasn't happened yet. But yeah, there you go. So thank you for watching. Do message me if you have any questions. Again, here's our cool resin art picture, and yeah, I will share more videos. Bye for now.